All right, so we are live with the Tech Stack Playbook. I have Jason back for double the action with coding, live streaming, tech. Jason, just for anyone that is tuning in that's new, do you want to just introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, definitely. So my name's Jason. I've been working in the open source community for many years. My background is mainly in IT over network support and just kind of like general IT for many, many years. And I've owned a few businesses doing that. But lately, I've settled into the role of a DevOps engineer at Freehold, which is one of the entities in the Stacks blockchain ecosystem, and really fell in love with what the Stacks project is doing and just trying to open up some new opportunities and have some fun along the way. With that comes some of the content we're going to cover today, which is all related to the CityCoins user interface. And we'll be kind of covering a little bit about how this product in general works, like from a DevOps perspective, and also be jumping into some code and some examples for some fun too.
Awesome. Thanks, Jason. And really excited to have you on another episode of Tech Stack Playbook. The last time we got a lot into what GitHub is, how to contribute to an open source project of which you've been building CityCoins through GitHub. So anyone that is interested in being a part of anything that's blockchain related specifically with Stacks, which is a blockchain that you've been a part of for quite a while. So anyone can check out CityCoins on GitHub. It's publicly accessible. And we did a little bit of coding using Git to basically learn how to pull a project and then make a branch and then contribute to that locally, create a pull request, and then push that back to Jason so that he could see it, merge it into the project, and then have it be a part of the code base. So that's how GitHub and open source can work. So we got to do a little bit of that on the last call. And now we're going to be jumping a little bit into DevOps. So I know you have a great big background in DevOps. But can you just give us sort of a high level of what DevOps is and what it means to you as someone who is focused on DevOps?
Yeah, definitely. And one of the things I really liked was a title you used for this, which was keeping the lights on. That's the main job of DevOps, and it depends on how you apply it, but really it's just making sure that there's process and procedure to keeping things running, to standard monitoring, and making sure that the services stay alive, whatever they may be. So, nowadays you have a lot possible with serverless. You have a lot of architecture going towards like microservices. There's, of course, software as a service, which is everywhere. So there's a ton of different ways that you can do this, but really it's just making sure that everything continues to run as expected for the company.
And just kind of asking, just because this is kind of top of mind. So when you deploy an application, right, or maybe you deploy a microservice or a set of microservices, is there a lot of maintaining that goes on as a DevOps engineer? Of course, you deploy an app and it's running, but then I'm sure people will say oh, I see all these updates, on my phone for an application. So from the App Store or something like that. So is DevOps involved in that process? What does that actually look like to bring software client side? Is it sort of a one and done thing, or is it a continual updating and deploying and sending information to clients? What does that look like?
Yeah, that's a good question. And really it comes down to the fact that everything is going to need an update eventually. You don't want to be frozen in one software version. You don't want to fall 3 behind because you don't want to buy the latest. Ideally, you're going to keep moving with the pace. And one of the things I love about open source projects is usually you can be involved in that process of how the software evolves, versus somebody just coming back and saying, oh, this is what's coming next, and you have to deal with it, plus pay us money. So there's a more fair relationship there, but you do have to anticipate change at any time. So I think really the keystones are setting something up so that it could run forever, but making sure that you have monitoring or processes in place to keep that online in case something should happen. You should always have plans for disaster recovery, or if something completely breaks, or what is our backup options. And really, depending on the use case of the company or what you're doing, you can expand from there and make that more robust.
Awesome. That's super cool. And kind of building off of that, I did want to dive a little bit into what serverless DevOps can be. I know you're super savvy with GitHub and how you can create deployment scripts. I sort of can talk about like from like Amplify, like the AWS Amplify framework is really great for like CI/CD pipelines. You can basically have different branches, right? So you have like your production branch, you have maybe your staging branch, and then a dev branch. And then when you push code to the production branch, that can auto build a script that can then push an app live. So maybe you have it from like maybe like you have like it pushed to a domain. Netlify has the same type of situation where you can deploy a build and then run that. Two really great use cases, I think, for serverless DevOps. But what's your experience been like? Do you ever like do deployment through containers with Kubernetes? Like, do you do more like serverless stack, which is just cloud-based deployment? I was kind of curious what you think serverless DevOps is or can be for developers.
Yeah. Well, two areas that I can definitely speak to as part of the CityCoins project would be, serverless website hosting, which I think is a really fun way to deliver, especially static pages and now even interactive apps versus having to have that old LAMP server running and worrying about keeping it updated and everything that goes along with that. You can push your code right to machines that run the code, and it makes it nice and simple. So with the CityCoins UI, for example, we actually run that through a combination of GitHub Actions for the CI/CD, and then that will trigger Cloudflare's Wrangler tool to upload things to Cloudflare workers and Cloudflare workers' sites. And I've been really happy with this product overall because it makes it easy as long as you can make sure that the deployment script understands what you're doing, be it a React app, a Vue app, or a static site generated with like Hugo or something else. As long as you're able to make that connection in the code, it deploys very simply. It's done through the GitHub Actions, so we do it mainly on production pushes to main at this point. And it's online and live, and I mean, like, response time is ridiculous with this. Like, it's definitely been my favorite so far in doing that. So that's the serverless side, and I've been able to. This UI itself is really just a vanilla React app with the Stacks libraries and just a few extra things to kind of make it all work. But it's a very basic kind of thing, and I like it that way because it reminds me of that Unix philosophy of like do one thing and do it well. So each component can do that, and each thing can be a part of everything else. And all of that seems to be really easily hosted and used with Cloudflare in particular.
Nice. I like that. Do one thing and do it well. That's really awesome. I like that a lot. And just kind of also building off of that, I know we're going to be diving a little bit more into GitHub and what that can be used for. Specifically, the last time that we left off, I had contributed something. You had, edited code, and then we're working on basically like the code base, creating different files that I actually haven't pulled yet. So we're going to be going through that process of what it looks like where, I have something that's kind of like outdated or old code. We're going to run that, and then we're going to also then pull code onto my local repository and update that to the origin. So Jason's code and my code will be the same. So we're going to be going through that. And we're going to be diving into like basically how GitHub is configured and what to use it for. At a high level, do you want to kind of just walk us through what you use GitHub for your open source project and how it sort of helps support open innovation and just tooling related to having different types of people working on the same code base, and you as the maintainer can manage that project? Like, do you want to just walk us through a little bit of what GitHub is helpful for you as a maintainer?
Sure. Yeah, I'm happy to walk through some of that. What we have with the CityCoins organization, for example, is just a completely open org. If you ask to join it, then anyone's welcome to join and be a part of it. There are certain there's probably about 5 repositories total, I believe. So you have, one is the CityCoins for the smart contracts. And one of the cool factors with that is our CI/CD pipeline will actually test the contracts using a tool called Clarinet. And it will also, so it'll check them to make sure the syntax is valid, and then it'll run a set of tests that are written in TypeScript against the contracts that give you an idea of like how it's going to operate on the chain and much more information. That's where our code coverage comes from. So that was good on the contract side. The UI, as I mentioned earlier, is hosted serverless through Cloudflare. We're able to launch that through the same pipeline. We just throw changes in the main, and they're automatically uploaded, and the website goes live. We're actually also hosting the documentation there via Gitbook, and Gitbook has a tight integration with GitHub where any of the changes you make are then submitted as a pull request, and it's kind of like merged in by a bot that handles everything. There can be multiple contributors that do it through Gitbook, or you can literally make contributions through GitHub itself. So there's a lot of neat opportunities there. And we run a small CDN through GitHub as well, and that one's actually linked up with Cloudflare Pages, which is one of their newer applications. And very simply just takes the files that are located in the different folders and gives them a resolvable domain so that we're able to pull them for things like the logo for the tokens and some of the other resources that we have.
Oh, it just cut out for me. So sorry.
That's good. That was it. I was just finishing up, so hopefully we didn't lose too much there.
No, it was just for a second. Okay, awesome. And just in terms of deploying code and where DevOps fits into this, I think this like kind of primes the pump for what we're going to be actually showing and doing some live screen sharing. So, do you think that do you want to like maybe share like the code that you've been working on, and then we'll show that process of I have my local stuff running. Maybe it would be cool to sort of show like the finished product, at least for right now. Then I'll switch and then I'll show my current outdated state. And then we'll walk through the process of how to basically update the code to what you have. Do you think is that a good plan?
Yeah, we can definitely do that. I'm happy to cover some of that. And most of this will just cover the actual structure of the application, which I think is pretty interesting. I tried to find a blend between having to load information and not having to pass along too much information in the way. And I think I landed on something pretty cool.
Awesome. All right, cool. So I think you have your screen all shared. Is that queued up?
Yeah, it's all ready to go.
Okay, cool. All right, I'll add it to the stream.
Cool.
Cool. And it should align everything. Okay, awesome. We can see your screen.
Okay, cool. So what we're looking at here is the basic index that loads the entire app. Had to make a few changes here, but just wanted to note that this was where at the top level, it was good to import my different libraries like Bootstrap and be able to set up the CSS and everything else. One of the things I found is I didn't have the Bootstrap JavaScript in there, so certain functions weren't working, like to be able to close windows and do everything else. So that's all set up. And now we have a really, what I think is a clean structure for how these different things can be set up. And before I dive too into it, there was a vote recently in the CityCoins community where we were trying to figure out what city was coming next. So we have Miami, who's a powerhouse, definitely like punches above its weight, honestly. And with that, we were also looking at the possibilities of Austin, New York City, or San Francisco. And with that, I really wanted to take this redesign and say, okay, let's make it for all 4 of those. And we can slowly start to implement things as we go. Because then as we have to add new ones, there's a clear structure. It's really easy to add someone in, etc. So a little bit of what I'm going to share here is that structure that we're using, which I think is a kind of a creative way to use a combination of props and constants along with pages. So really quick here, we've got the main page that comes through with a header, logo, title, and auth, and then it loads the content. And our content down here loads a router. So this is using the reach router. And we then have a landing page, which is for people who haven't selected a city. And then we have a page per city. And within each of those is actually a set of variables that are all loaded from the store. So there's a store for common and a store for Austin, a mix of constants and atoms. And from here, everything gets passed down as a set of objects. So you're able to pull the city name and symbol, and every component underneath gets a object for the contracts, the token, and the config. So what I mean by that when I say objects is, for example, Austin, the contracts would list the deployer, the core contract, the auth contract, token. The token lists the name and the symbol, and the config gives you some additional information about that city. So these get passed from component to component to component so that we can generalize them. what that resulted in was what I think was pretty cool. So let me go ahead and see if I still have it open here. This would be the old interface that we had, and kind of had a introducing a little bit of information, everything going on. And this is where we are now. So this is a much more condensed version, I think a little bit easier to read. You can see your profile and pull up a little more information from your profile, which still needs some updates. And of course, you can select a city, either right here, you can do it from in the profile, or you can do it right here from the logo. And doing that loads one of those pages that I mentioned before, updates the logo up here, and gives you the functions that work with each city. So here you have the dashboard, stats, activation, mining. And one of the organizational things I'm doing here is you can see this little pillbox on the left. So you have like the ability to mine the CityCoin, to claim it, and to access some tools to get fancy with the functions. But what's really cool about this is these are all generalized components that work off of the variables that are passed to them. So this is the same exact structure for Miami, but with Miami variables. Same exact structure for New York, but with New York variables. And same for SFO, with SFO variables. So it really makes like a modular structure that we're able to move through and do that. And it's definitely come a little bit of a ways from when you saw it last, I'm sure.
Yeah, that's really great. I love how clean it looks still, but you added like the drop downs for the cities. Like that was super cool. And I think for anyone that's tuning in, they might recognize sort of that toolbar, but I really like how you've made it your own and like incorporated all of the different pages into it. So this is awesome. Do you want to just kind of go through like that routing again, like sort of going through each pages with the toolbar? Because it'll look very different on my version. So just to give everyone sort of a perspective of.
Yeah, here what we can do is kind of do it side by side of what's going on. So if we look at
yes.
Yeah, so if we look at app.js to start with, let me close these out. Then we can see, go ahead and close that. You've got the landing page at just slash, and then whenever you have a city that has an address or that we know exists, then a component would need to be created for it, or a page to be more specific, but it's still a component. So each one of these pages owns a path, and if you go outside of that path, you actually get the 404. So if we just said /WTF, for example, 404 not found, same kind of look to it, but very simple way to get back home.
Sure.
The way these paths work too is that they allow for things to go past SFO, like dashboard, stats, etc., because we're actually embedding a second router on each one of these pages. So to give a better example of that, let me snap back home here, and let's choose a city like Austin, for example. So once we get here, everything you see here is actually a second embedded router for each one of these pages. So if we go to the Austin page, then you can see we're returning a second router that's embedded. We make sure if we land on the home directory that we actually land on dashboard. So you can see ATX dashboard here. And from there, we load a city dashboard. These are all generic components that take the information here to generate the content. So that was one of the bigger goals, was to try and think of how would this look easy if we had 200 cities. And what it came down to was like you just make a page, you just pass along some information, everything else actually happens like magic. So from here, there's not much else we have to do to add a new city. And with that, each one of these components represents a new path. So you have dashboard, stats, mining, and tools. Oh, I'm sorry, stacking and tools. I was wondering where it went, but it just went down the line. So you got the same buttons that you see here, and you can see as I click those, the path up here at the top does change with each one. And then finally, for pages that are a little more complex, like mining, for example, then we can look at how the city mining component is configured. And actually, the city mining component just contains the nav bar, the mining container, and then the navigation to get back home. So then if we look into the, I believe it was the mining folder here, and we grab that mining container, then we can see a little more of what's going on here. So this is actually the menu that you see on the left-hand side, which are nav pills, as far as nav pills, and also using like nav bar and tabs features of Bootstrap. And then each one of these, when clicked on, will load a separate component. So in that case, you're able to, down here, loan mine CityCoins, claim mining rewards, and mining tools. But in the same way we were with the last one, we're literally passing down the properties that they need versus having them look them up. So they're also very generic, and it just makes it easy. Like as you switch cities, as long as you're passing the correct information in these three objects, then everything will work exactly the same.
That's awesome. Yeah. And you did this in like a day, like a couple days, a day and a half?
No, it's probably a good solid 3 days on it. And it's funny too because it goes through iterations. I probably redesigned the header like 3 times, and the nav was really bugging me. Even on this page, like I had more tabs across the top, and it just felt funny. And when I figured this out, one of the Easter eggs actually to it is, even though we don't have mobile wallet support yet, I wanted to be ready for that. So when you get under a certain screen size here, and especially as you're coming down to mobile, I also made sure that everything stacks in a way that completely makes sense. And may have to do like a little bit of stuff around this and the sidebar here for some of these more complex ones. But overall, everything on here will scale to mobile. So that's, I ignored it a bit last time because we were in a hurry to get it out the door, and I'm excited to have it in here this time because it leaves that new possibility. You can still get the same information. Everything works the same. Even your selection here is the same.
Oh, that's awesome.
Yeah, I think that's how Bootstrap is supposed to work, right?
Yeah, no, totally.
But the routing was really fun because what the problem I was trying to solve for was like having to do a whole ton of imports from the top, or having to pass a whole bunch of properties. And the thing that I'm using now that I'm pretty confident is going to work is this idea of having a store per city that just keeps the same exact object information that just would change from city to city. So you could look at like New York next to Miami here, and this structure would be one of the ways you add a new city is like you need to add this file with the correct information. Once you have that done, then you're able to just add a page. Once the page is added with the same exact components and it passes this information from the store, everything else operates exactly the same. Like nothing else has to be modified to add something.
Awesome.
So solving for that problem, I think it's going to work.
Sweet. All right, super.
So now what we need to do is take your version, which is quite outdated.
Yeah.
And we need to get you up to speed. So I think that'll be really fun to walk through because it's you can actually see the changes live. I know we talked about it a little beforehand, and it's definitely something you get into the habit of. Like knowing I was working with you, I was pushing commits more often. Like pretty much as soon as I'm done with something, even if I had to say first half of the work or I don't know what I'm doing, it didn't matter. It was just like commit the changes, send them up, and have them ready in case you download it at some point. And same thing with working on it. Like you start to develop this new culture when you start to work on things where you want to pull the latest before you work. And it's not a standard step that you would think of unless you've been in this space for a bit.
Oh yeah, totally. Oh, did I lose you? Oh, for a sec.
No, I'm just on mute, so we don't have any echo. I should still be on there as far as the screen, but we can switch to yours now. The update.
Okay, cool. It out when you were like mid talking, so I didn't want to make sure I didn't cut you off. Okay, sweet. Yeah, let me and then we can kind of jump. what I have. All right, cool. You can see my screen. I'm just going to zoom in a little bit.
Yeah, I can see browser on the left, code on the right.
The time that we were working on this too. Yeah, the last time that we were going through this was like a couple of days ago. So I was getting all the emails when you were committing to the repo. So I feel like this is going to be super outdated. But just to catch anyone up, this is the CityCoin UI, which is the base called Live Refactoring, and this was the branch that I was pushing to. And then what we ended up doing was I created some code. I then created a pull request to basically send Jason my local version onto his version as a maintainer. So it sort of creates this degree of separation between what I'm working on as like a person that's outside the project to Jason, who is the maintainer of the actual project, just so that I couldn't have like I push a bunch of code and this automatically gets incorporated into his repo, because I feel like Jason wouldn't like that unless he had actually reviewed the code and knew exactly what was going to be in that. So what's good about GitHub is Jason can get... Oh, what was that?
Oh, I'm sorry. I was just going to add to that. So really the process that we settled on, because we kind of went back and forth on what needed to be done, is that first you fork the repo, which what that does is takes all the code and puts it under your GitHub username or your organization of choice. And it's like your own copy of it to work with. From there, do create a new branch, because when you go to push back to the branch when you go to push back to the repo that you were working on before, the branch name is part of what indicates what you're working on. So in this case, we use Live Refactoring. And then we open that pull request from his branch in his repo back to the main repo to the main branch. So we're saying that we want to take those changes that are over here, bring them over there, merge them in, and make them official. And what's cool about that is, as a maintainer of the repository, when you open a pull request against my repository, I actually have access to that same branch. And if there is something that we can work on together, then I have that ability to jump in and kind of make some changes. So when we look at the history in Brian's actual repo, what we'll see is not only did he make some commits in the beginning when he did that, but you'll also see the work I've done this week on top of maybe we can commit a few more changes from your side. And I don't know if this pull request will be ready by the end of the video tonight, because it turned out to be a lot, being a refactor and everything else. But I do think it'll be really cool to see it update live. So the one thing I'd recommend before you do the pull from GitHub is to make sure yarn start is running so we can see it live.
Yeah. Totally. So if you can see my screen, I'm doing yarn start. And that is going to create the build script that's going to run this project locally for me. Again, this is like super outdated, so this is not going to look as cool as what Jason just shared yet. But as soon as we do a pull, then it will. But for anyone that tuned in earlier this week, this will be a familiar localhost 3000. I'm also very excited because I did see like 38. I'm behind 38 commits. So there's definitely quite a lot that is not in this current version. So there's going to be a lot that's updated, which is awesome.
Yeah, and I was moving files around like crazy. At first, I was like, this component should be a page. This page should be a component. That should be over here. These need to be in folders. Wait, no, they don't. And it was it's a lot of fun to figure it out. But it really, like, when you look at your goals and what you're trying to achieve, you can really make data work for you, especially when you're in an opportunity like this of doing a big refactor versus like, oh, this is how the application works and we got to deal with it. So it was really, really cool to approach it. I like that rebuild aspect. Like, let's rip it all apart, put it all back together, and see what happens. So, and there we are. I forgot where we started. I love it.
Yeah, completely different, like, but the foundation's there. Like, do you remember how like we added this in there? So this was like the drop down for cities. We had these different items that would then be what you created, which was the different components. So you basically have these routes, and then they route through different pages, and then read the docs and everything. So yeah, this is the original one. So I'll like go back. And I remember also that we created this second, or I created this second header because I didn't have a wallet yet, which I set up this week. So this was sort of like the unauthenticated version of that. And then I think we started dashboard. That was like a route that we added. It was like, welcome to dashboard. And I think this was pretty much like the same. But then you added like a bunch of different UI elements here. So this is awesome.
Yeah, totally. So this was, it was coming from the original website and implementing some of the ideas, and definitely led to some inspiration to create what kind of exists now. And probably one of the biggest pieces of feedback I got over the last 3 days was to make sure it's very clear what the action is. Like, what are you being asked of? So that's where your select a city box ended up in 3 different places, just so I could make sure that hopefully, I captured the user's attention no matter how they tend to deal with things. But let's do the git pull. So at this point, if you leave that open with yarn start running and you pull the latest code, we should see a magic transformation in the website there.
Yeah, totally. So I see we're 38 commits behind. So this was fetched 6 minutes ago. So we see that we're quite behind here. So we do pull origin. It's going to now refresh the repo. And now you'll see here, it's going to recompile. It's adding in everything that Jason had pushed. So you'll see some updates here, and probably on all of the pages. This is just the app.js page. And it's going to rewrite the whole project with all this new code. So we'll keep that running in the background, and then this might take a little bit of time. But I'm like very excited to see this. And just while this is loading, Jason, can you walk us through, because you said you got feedback from different people in the community about what they want for the app. I know you sort of have your own vision of the project, and maybe you also reach out to other partners or people. Like when you sort of think about just sort of the scope of what's ahead and what's needed, like how do you come up with that, like as a maintainer of a project like this?
Yeah, so this project in particular, one of the things I'm really proud of is how we've always envisioned it as a protocol. So when we were developing the contracts for Miami Coin, we were actually developing the contracts for any city coin, and Miami Coin was the first. So with that mentality, we were able to create, just a base set of things that would happen for each city and in a base structure. And the one part that lacked that was the UI. So when I looked at the UI, I knew that I had some information that was coming from the Miami Coin contract, some that was like general to city coins. And before we could even add a new city, we needed a way to represent them individually. But we could also respect the fact that they are going to have the same code base, they're going to operate the same, and even leave a little room for change. Like, for example, if we were to change anything about the contract or the information or the functions, a lot of that could be updated on the respective pages for that individual city and not break the functionality that we're seeing here. So it's pretty neat to have that. Like, that was the overall vision, was like, how do we serve 200 even though we're only serving 1 and we're trying to serve 3, trying to serve 5? Don't lose track of what that could look like.
Totally. And I just want to say, I really like how you integrated the router in like so many different places. So when you choose a city, like let's just choose Miami. So then like it creates this MIA/dashboard or /stats. So I want to actually dive into this code because I think this would be interesting for just different users here or different viewers here, sort of how you broke this down. So there's these different states or these different pages that are a part of each project, but you can choose Austin, and then it has the same status. So like dashboard, stats, activation, and all these different things. So I just thought that was very cool. And I'd love to kind of maybe bring up the code, and as you talk through it, we can kind of walk through how exactly you set that up, just because I thought that's interesting. And then of course here, you can still route between the different pages and that'll work. So How did you break this up to be sort of these different pages of components?
Yeah, definitely. There was some trickery there, and what I decided on was finally that there would be one page per city. That page would load the relevant constants and information, the relevant objects from the store, and then from there, each subcomponent would use that information, regardless of what city it's from, in order to be able to render the components correctly. So with that, the two main areas that have routers are starting with app.js. So if you want to pull that one up.
Mm-hmm.
And there at the bottom, you'll see as far as content goes, you have this basic router that says there's a landing page if you don't pick a city, and then whatever city you pick gets matched, and if you don't find something, you 404. Boom, simple, done. And the nice thing about that too is you think of each thing as a component. Like the 404 not found component, for example, is used in the other routers because it's the same exact message, same kind of deal. So the second router that you're going to see happens on every city page, and actually as part of the navbar component. It's a little bit of both. And it's interesting actually because I took two different approaches here, and there may be like a unified approach or a better way to do this, but as I was cycling through iterations, I was trying to decide the best way to work both with routers and with some of these components that don't follow like normal paths. So if you look at a city, for example, if we go, pages, cities, Austin, perfect. So here you have a router that redirects the, a little bit further down where it's actually, where the return is. Yeah, right there. So here you have a second router. And the way Reach Router handles this is it will actually allow you, like you can have a router at the top level, a router and a component, and everything stays relative. So it was really, really simple to just put the path names in, and the city name or the city symbol would be provided. So what this page does is it loads any of those based on the path for dashboard, activation, stats, stacking, mining, tools. And if it doesn't match, it throws the same exact 404 with not found at the bottom. But there's one more thing this page does that actually makes the magic happen with what's going on in the header. Because what we have in the header is not a child component. That is way back from app.js. And I was trying to figure out, how do I have this image auto update when I change pages, but how is it going to know? You know, do I need a callback function that I pass down and then I set it back up? And it turns out I could do that with atoms. So I use Jotai in here. I think it's a wonderful idea for managing state, and it kind of replaces useEffect, or you can use it alongside useEffect for some pretty cool stuff. So what I ended up doing was, if you scroll up in the Austin function above the return, you'll see here that it will grab these two set functions, and then it will use an effect to update them. So every time you load a page, what it's going to do is grab an atom for current city and current city symbol, and it's going to update those based on the page you're on. So every time you do you do ATX, you do MIA, you do NYC, like that automatically updates the symbol in the page, and then it loads all the components, same with the information for that. So what happens there is, if we were to look at the actual header logo, which would be under the components common folder. So what the header logo does is it looks at what the current city is, and it looks at a list of cities. Oh, I'm sorry, wait till you get there. All right, right at the top there. So the first one is an atom for current city. That was actually what we updated on the Austin page. Mm-hmm. And the second one is a list of cities that comes from the common store, which basically just lists out a city name, a city symbol, and a name symbol, and a link to the logo. That way it knows which one it needs. So it'll look through that entire array in the next line for the reduce array. It'll look through that entire array, and if it finds a match to the current city, then it will load that image. If it doesn't find a match, then it'll load the default CityCoin logo. So even if something went wrong, In this case, it would just load the default CityCoin logo, which is what you see if you were to click on the MIA top left and go home. So the two combinations there is, one, it was embedding reach routers into components so that when a component is loaded as a child to another parent, that routing can still be, what's the word for that? Relative. So you still get relative routing for that. And then the other trick was to use each page to update an atom, which allows you to store state across components, and then load that atom in the header and use a fallback to the main image. I see possibly using the same pattern to update that title that says CityCoins to possibly New York Coin, Miami Coin, or one of the other names, just to show you a little more that you're switching from page to page to page. But I like the logos. they came out really nice, and I like that. That's my favorite menu. My concern was maybe not everybody would find that menu. But that's where you get Choose a City at the bottom. And if you had your wallet connected, you actually get Choose a City off in your profile tab as well, which is pretty cool.
Nice. Yeah, this is super clean. And just if you could kind of like walk through Use Atom. So I'm just pulling this up right here. So this is a package from Jotai that you added in. So is there like an easy explanation for Use Atom? Because I'm curious when you talked about this and then with the reducer. So it's a state management system, but how is there a folder that the Use Atom goes into? Or?
Yeah, the store folder. If you pull up like store common, for example.
Yeah, let me.
So it'll be, you're in components. You want to be in store.
Store, yeah.
Yeah, there you go. And then common. You could also pull up a city one, but I think the only ones I have right now are in common. So the idea of an atom is, or the best way I could describe it is, imagine a use effect that you could use across multiple components. And what I mean by that is, imagine being able to update the state in one place on a component, either at the bottom or the top of the tree, and then be able to reuse that state in other components without having to load anything special. That's what atoms do for you. And there's also a lot you can do in combining them. You can actually make that one depend on another. You can make them derive each other. There's a whole ton you can do with it. But in the very basic sense that I'm using it, is you're either reading to it or you're writing to it. And you might have, like, for example, the block height that we have for the network. We're only going to read that and display that in a lot of places. But maybe every time we load a page, we want it to be updated. So in that case, you would set it from each page, but you could read it from any component and still get the updated value. So that's one of the advantages, and it's a very simple state management, but it ends up being very powerful because of it. So that's what I'm doing with the block height, for example. And then what you also have highlighted down below with the current city list. This is something that I'm not committed to yet. I was still trying to figure out the best structure for it, but it's really used by the header logo, maybe by the header title, and by areas that are nowhere down the component tree. Because what I was saying earlier is you have each page for a city will load the respective constants and objects and information that are needed for each city to use the generic components. And that's great. But when you're looking at something like the header, it loaded before all that. And even when you change all that, nothing else changes up there. So I needed some kind of state management to be able to say, hey, city changed, now we want to change the logo.
Yeah, and now it's very clear to see when you have name, symbol, and logo. You have these for all of these different states. You have these 4 different items based on the index, and then those are those 4 cities that we have here. So
yeah, and if we look at each component, if you pull up the nav bar, for example, which would be under common, components common. The cool thing about doing this is remembering that I want to change code in as little places as possible. So when I have to add new cities, I want to make sure that it is super simple. I fix a few things and everything else just works. So if we look at header logo.
All right, got it.
Yeah. So what you see there is it looks for the current city. It does the matching, but the magic is really down there in the return. So if you look down a little bit further, and it's a bit spread out because of the layout to have that menu. But what we're looking at here is the main city logo that loads, and then we're looking at the menu underneath. And if you look at the menu, each one of those logos loads the individual file for the logo. So that was very straightforward. And if you scroll down a little further, these weren't the generative ones I was thinking of, actually. So each one of these, it does pull in the SVG. I made it so that the SVG is exposed from the constants file, and it's very simple to find the individual logos. The page I am thinking of would use a map. Let me find that. I have an example I wanted to share, so I got to find it again here.
Okay, awesome. And while you're looking up that, it's super interesting to see how you sort of create this data store or the state store, and then you're able to call that in different pages. So I see where you say import use Atom at the top, then you pull in these different items from the store from common. And then every time that you call current city or set city.
Yeah, exactly. So it's similar to using use effect. Calling set city will update that atom on all pages.
Mm-hmm.
And you can actually see that when you're logged in on the profile tab, it'll tell you what city is selected, which comes from that same atom as well. It becomes a really simple way for something like this that's not entirely complex, but there's definitely a lot of data that we don't want to load on every component. Mm-hmm. I'm looking all the way down when you consider that, like, this page has a navbar component, it has the container for the dashboard then has the mining activity, stacking activity, and transactions. When you're doing each one of those levels, you wouldn't want to do an API call for each one of those headings, because then you're just being overly resource intensive. And I already think I wish there were still easier ways. Like, I'd rather be querying a database that already synced up with the information than getting it directly. But we are here, and things are performing well, so I guess I shouldn't complain.
Well, it's always like optimization, right? Like, you can always optimize, but as long as you get it working and running now, you can always optimize later.
Exactly. So the example I was going to show you is actually, if you look at select city, and this is something I could end up doing with the nav bar at the top, but so select city lives under, I want to say it's components common as well, because if you that's the choose a city drop down.
Oh, select city, I see it. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So this can be inserted. It's on the profile. It's there at the bottom. It's on the landing page. Like, you can just kind of insert it anywhere. But the thing I like about it is it grabs that CityCoin, the city array, city list array, from the store, and from there actually generates all of the options and cities on the list. So that part's the navigation. But if you look down under the return, you can see there's a select for the return. There's one option for home, or none, which is like choose a city. And then everything else comes from that array. So if we were to update that array in the store, then the drop-down automatically creates an extra option for it.
Oh, very cool.
So again, if I have to add a new city, I want to update as little as possible.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, totally. And this is like, I could see that this is like pretty efficient. So that's awesome.
Fingers crossed, but I do like this latest iteration, and I'm excited to see it through. You know, if you click on mining, for example, this would be a page that would technically, activation through tools would only be available if you're logged in. So I don't have that check in place yet. But yeah, you get a little help thing that goes right to the documentation for mining. So I see some opportunities to link the application and the documentation one-to-one, based on the actions and the containers that are there. And what's cool about that is a lot of the documentation about the protocol, like this part in particular, is very general. So it doesn't matter what city you're switching to. When you're looking at mining a CityCoin, you're still looking at mining a CityCoin. So there's a few spots that will be much more forward and quick to link to the documentation. And as much as we've tried to answer questions, one piece of feedback I get is that the information is here, but not everybody can digest it. And hopefully we'll have some graphics and have some more fun with that too. But small steps, big results.
Yeah, totally. Okay, this is super cool. And if I tried to connect my wallet, would I be able to log in or?
Yeah, if you have your Stacks wallet logged in, it should let you, as long as you have that browser extension.
Yeah. Let me try to. I might need to click it for it to reload, but let me try.
Yeah, I have mine. Mine loads on click. It's a little annoying here and there, but it's all good. Yeah, so if that's in, you'll be able to connect a wallet. This is the standard screen presented by Stacks Connect. So if you're using that library, this is what pops up. I have seen recently that I got an issue with the logo. I think that's just a CORS issue that I can resolve in the background.
Mm-hmm.
But once you're logged in, you can now see your profile at the top. And if you dare to click the profile itself, it will show like your balance and some more information.
Oh, gotcha. Yeah, I just set it up, so I don't have anything in there. But
do it.
All right, I'll click
so
that
brings a little off canvas that used to point directly to some of the Miami stuff, but we'll have some rotating buttons like based around those actions. We'll have account balances based on the different city coins, like maybe you only show it if it's greater than 0, that kind of thing. And you can see that same select city, choose a city box right down there as well. So that is exactly the same as the one you see in other spots. It auto generates based on the array of cities. And try changing it. If you go select New York, you'll see it'll say selected city, New York City.
It changes.
And then, so that's the atom that's used by the header. And then the selection box is the same selection box that's used to do the routing from the from the app level. So it's pretty fun. Like I see a lot of potential in this. I want to push through to get the core features done. But really excited to see what this could look like, and quick walk through the mining part too, since we're kind of close to it. So if you X that out, or just click off of it, one or the other, go to the mining tab. There's a little bit of interesting functionality here too. So you can see number of blocks to mine. Let's say it's 1. This actually calls the mine tokens function in the background, which is for mining a single block. And if you enter 10, instead of 10 stacks, actually enter 10 blocks. Like you're going to do mine for 10 blocks. So the box above it where you put 1.
I'll put 10?
Yeah.
Oh.
Then you get a separate entry, and these are automatically sorted by columns. You can actually scroll up and down on the 10 or change it, and these adapt to that as well. And let's say you did 100, or like that many, because that can be a lot to tab through. If you check the use the same amount for all and start typing in block 1, I think you can start typing in any of them, really.
Oh, that's really cool.
Yeah, so some of this was very thankful to Frieger and NVIDIA. Frieger from the Stacks community, NVIDIA from the Savita group, also in the Stacks community, were very helpful in making this possible. And I've just put some polishing on top of it to kind of clean up the code and make things look. So now it'll say mine for X blocks on the button, unless you go back to 0. And from there, you would technically confirm that you agree to the terms about mining, and then you'd be able to send that contract call. And from there, it would call out to the contract, submit the transaction, and get you started. And that's not done yet, but we're right on track. Like looking at the new data structure, I think it's just going to be a matter of implementing each feature step by step and getting the new variable names and kind of like improving the code as I go too. There's I've found where it's like, that should be up here, or that should be over there, or that should be in a library. I enjoy that type of reorganization.
Mm-hmm. And do you see reorganization as a way to be a part of the DevOps process where, yeah, again, you're getting that feedback, you're building, iterating, deploying, updating, maintaining? Is this all sort of I just want to ask, like, is everything considered DevOps, or do you think DevOps is like a specific subset of the
Yeah,
deployment
yeah, no,
integration?
I'm happy to comment on that, and I will say I'm entirely out of scope in what I'm doing with the code there. But the reason for that is, I feel like as you learn to do different things, like let's say program a smart contract in Clarity or program a front end using stacks.js to be able to interact with your contract, or being able to set the pipeline so that it does deploy after you push out new code instead of having to do something manually, or even the fact that like I don't host this domain, I just have an API key that I push to and it does. Each little part, it really represents a different element. And coming back to DevOps, like that to me would be making sure that pushing to main kicks off a build that goes straight to production, making sure that dev pushes to a test site so you'd be able to do some previews. I haven't gone that far because it's basically just been you and I, on this refactor and everything like that. But if there was a larger audience, that's nice because then as we're all doing pushes into the development branch or as the latest branch gets merged into that, we can then really do some hardcore testing and make sure none of the pages broke or there's no regressions in the code or anything like that. But really, it depends on the size and complexity of the project. A lot of these type of things start with a core group and they can grow on to have a few maintainers or people that really pick it up and care about it. And at this point, I just want to encourage as much of that as possible. Like I think this is a great learning opportunity for anybody who is really interested in blockchain, is really interested in the flow from how an entire project can be launched. So that's including contracts in the background and UI on the front end and possibly like running a node or doing something like that. And I will put a side note, that's another thing DevOps wise, is to run a Stacks node, for example, not a miner, but just a follower node. It would open up the entire API to your application from a node that you own versus relying on the hosted services that are out there. So, Hero hosts a whole bunch of nodes and load balanced, and they run the wallet and Explorer. The Savita group runs a node. The Plan Better Explorer, they run a node in Explorer as well. So there's a bunch of decentralized groups that are starting to do this, and I think that's going to be a key with kind of Web3 development mindset in general, especially around DevOps, is that you want to be running your own local copy of something, right? Like if you're working with Bitcoin all the time, you should be running a Bitcoin node because then you're going to learn to interact with these things that the websites and block explorers and everything else, that's what they were programmed to do. So in the same way with Stacks, it's really great to run a Stacks follower. It's not a too heavy of a commitment. I think it cost me about $30 a month on DigitalOcean. Mm-hmm. And overall, it gives me the ability to run my queries against a separate server and not have to worry about the main load. That being said, those are my DevOps experience with running a Stacks node is not what powers this website. It does use the main Hero APIs. But I have noticed that when I need to do some additional testing or if I want to verify a transaction, for example, actually went through, having my own node is a very strong resource, and it's also helping out the network. So you're getting a little into the nitty-gritty and keeping it simple, but I thought it was super fun to be able to run one, and maybe one day, maybe next Hacktoberfest or hopefully sooner, we can make a one-click app for running a Stacks node on DigitalOcean. I bet they'd love that.
That would be very cool. Yeah, let's do it. Or maybe sooner. And then we can highlight it at next year.
I think we should. I was joking about the time in there. I don't want to take a year to get it done. But I do see a neat vision. So, there's been some talk about what's going on with developer tooling and how things can improve. And I do think that as anybody running a larger website or application, considering running a node is very helpful, both to the network and just to your, hopefully to reliability if you're able to run things. And there's a number of ways to do it. You can run it just straight by installing the related services. You can run it via Docker. There are options available with Kubernetes. I am a fan of keeping it simple, so I did build mine from scratch just to give it a shot. And I felt like it was a very comfortable process. There's some great documentation and some great work laid by like Jay Wiley and Charlie and some of the others at the DevOps team at Hero.
Nice. So you learn a lot by other people in the industry that are pushing out content. So are these like blog posts? Are these like GitHub README files? Like, what are the best ways to like get that type of information? Like, is it Twitter? Like, tell us like where are the best places to look for that type of information?
Yeah, so I'm the guy that writes really long emails that nobody reads. And so what I mean by that is I tend to really dig into, like, I love a good white paper. I like getting into the details. I tend to store more data than I'd ever need, almost like a digital pack rat. There's occasional times where it's like, man, I should just set my computer on fire and start over. Like, it's just too much.
Yeah.
But the benefit to that is, like having a lot of information to sift through, you do start to see some places that things grow. So when you find a project that you're interested in, first place I usually look is like, is there documentation? Boom. And if there's not documentation, then usually there's README files and things that at least contain some information that are directly related to the repo, but will give you some information. And of course, if that's not there, then you're starting to read source code and really look at what you're doing. And what I enjoy doing is reading other people's codes. So if you don't find documentation, you don't find READMEs, sometimes you can really learn about what their code is doing, especially if you're trying to repurpose it or use it for something of your own. And one of the things I've done, aside from just reading code, is I look for patterns. I'm like, okay, so this person handles this a certain way, and I've seen it handled another way, and I know I can do this with an array. And you start to like form your own ideas from what others have done. Like that's what's the beauty of collaborating on open sources is, you get these ideas like, oh, I wouldn't have done it that way. And now I have a combination of like great examples I've seen across from now having Copilot, which is a fascinating experience. It's getting smarter, which I hope is a good thing.
We can only hope.
Yeah, it's like this is probably okay, right? Like that's I think it'll be fine.
Totally.
But anyway, like you start noting these patterns, and then you start to be able to really take the code and rewrite it. I think that is the most educational thing you can do is like, all right, they used all those variable names. I'm going to use brand new variable names. I'm going to change up the order of some things. I'm going to see if this works. I'm going to see if it doesn't. And in doing that type of experimentation, you end up learning from a lot of experts that are out there and sharing information, even if they're not the types to be more social or share information. So, you just kind of work your way backwards, and the code is always there. Having the open source, you can see how something was done. And that's really the key to the whole philosophy.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, totally. And just adding a couple more places, like GitHub's been really good. Also, Riplet's been really good for getting different tutorials and different people. Also, Code Sandbox has been really awesome. I've really liked looking at what other people post. Like CodePen, but that's more for like front end stuff. But definitely looking at GitHub is like a really great place to find stuff.
Oh yeah.
Also, Code Sandbox.
Well, and CodePen's not a bad idea either. I love them for finding like cool CSS3 animations or things that. And like you're trying to learn a pattern, like, all right, I know I can transform a rectangle into a circle and I can do some cool things, but you start to see some of what's possible and it's like, oh, I love that, but I would have done this, and you can like add to it and create your own things. So definitely a lot of resources out there. And of course, we probably couldn't go all the way without mentioning like Stack Overflow and some of these major resources that give us good ideas. There was a funny meme I saw that was like all dirt road and then like a paved section of highway and then more dirt road following it, and it basically said my code, Stack Overflow, my code. And it's funny, like we find these things that people have done and they can really teach us some things. Like when I really started working on the UI stuff, which I wasn't ever a UI guy, I'm still learning. Like if I had to label myself, I'm a learner at this point. And in doing that, I had no idea the number of changes that happened between the JavaScript I used to write and ES6. And what I found is not only have things gotten easier, but I absolutely love the programming patterns I'm able to employ now. Like it's come far enough where it's like, oh, this is all easy now. I like this, and I've been having a blast with it. And even using basic React, it's not my favorite because it's everywhere, but because it's everywhere, I'm hoping to be able to rally more people around it. So sometimes that comes to framework choice, or like how we're going to work with things. Like the reason we landed on React and Bootstrap was the original project that I forked was built on vanilla React and Bootstrap 4. So that was where we started, and it looked entirely different. We went through, we upgraded Bootstrap 4 to 5. I did the basic layout that you kind of see on the website now, and thought that was a good starting point. But as I watched people start to use it, user feedback was amazing. Like there's been a great group, a huge community in the Discord around CityCoins, very supportive people, and they share what their frustrations were. And some of them we were able to fix in band along the way. And I do hope that this particular upgrade really makes it easier for people to interact with things the way they're looking to.
Awesome. And I just added some more places just to find the type of code. So we had Stack Overflow, Medium, Practical Dev, Dev.to, Hashnode is really good. What are other places? What are we? What more places can we add?
Oh, YouTube for sure. Yeah. Oh, yeah. Definitely YouTube videos. You look up something and just kind of look for the videos to see how people share it. Definitely have seen some great content that way. One of the other things I thought of, though, that might be an even better point to what you can find out there is throw a little comment in your code and thank the person for where it came from. It's a link, and the link might die and the code might disappear or whatever, but it only takes a minute. And if somebody helped you have a real breakthrough, it's good to give a little bit of credit where you can. I feel like if you take it and you full on rewrite it and you're just using the patterns, maybe you're in a gray area, you don't need to do it there. But if you find something that's like, oh, this post to Discord function is so simple, I'm just going to use it, then you should credit that person. Like, give them a little nod. Why not?
Yeah, I'm surprised at how accessible and helpful the dev community is. Even just messaging people, I've totally done this where there's a maintainer of a repo. I see that they made code that's something that I'm interested in also doing. And then I said oh, hey, I'm looking to do this. Do you have any perspectives on how to implement X, Y, and Z? This is my use case. And people will email back, especially Twitter. If you just send someone a DM, they have DMs open, you just send them a message. I'm just surprised that this is the type of industry where you could just do that and random strangers will just message you back. And I don't know, not ask for anything, just be that's cool. Here's what I'd recommend. Let me know how your project ends up, if I can help or anything. Even people on Medium. Have you ever experienced that? Talking to random strangers?
Definitely. I was going to say, to get a little philosophical on it, we're on the emergence of the pseudonymous economy. And I think this is a fascinating idea. It's something that crypto entirely enables. And even today, I do have my name on here and my face on here, but I could operate entirely under a pseudonym if I chose to. And in the correct stances, I could still have an identity that I attach to that doesn't have to be tied to my real world identity. And there may be other ones that need to or otherwise, but this is something that wasn't possible if you look back 100 years from now. It was there were certain scams and schemes and funny things that happened that may have totally with identity because we didn't have a global scale. Right. But now we have this unique ability that people could work from that perspective. And I was really fortunate. Before I started working with Stacks, I worked extensively with a community called Bleeping Computer, and they were a malware removal forum that was global. It was an international program. They had a training program that was like boot camp. I think it took about 2 years to get through. It was quite an adventure. Wow. Going through that, you could then go back and help users, and it was all volunteer and it was all done for free. So I was able to have a study hall administrator in Romania and another managing member in Germany and get an experience with that international community of people who like, yeah, I've seen their avatar, but we never had video calls. Like we worked on forums and DMs. So I got some early experience with that, and I found that I'm okay with it. I think it's a fascinating way to work, and I don't think that the two necessarily have to be tied together. So that, yeah, like if somebody reached out to me and said, hey, I was trying to build a CityCoins UI and I couldn't do something, I'd be happy to point them to my code, to walk through my code, and even try to help with some code. And I've even had the advantage to do that with one of the projects in the Stacks ecosystem. And I pointed a few back at what we have, because there's some code that we run is called post conditions. So whenever you're submitting a transaction on the Stacks blockchain, there's two things that happen. One, you're calling the function with the parameters, and then you're also specifying what assets are going to move. So I'm going to say, hey, I'm calling this contract function, but it shouldn't move, it will not move more than 100 stacks, or I can even say it will move exactly 100 stacks. If that post condition isn't met, the transaction will fail. So it's another safeguard against, like, let's say somebody updated a variable in the contract and their transaction went through before mine, and it was going to cost me double. Well, it's still going to fail because I set the correct post conditions. And this is one area that it has definitely caused a lot of people to stumble. And I am constantly pointing back to this UI, and I've been able to like get into a few repos and help people out and do that. And it's a really cool experience. It's neat to just be able to give, and then same when you get back, when you reach out to those people and they say, hey, I'll help you with that, or we're going to watch how you're doing, or like you said, you actually hear from the maintainer and you're like, oh, it's not just some inactive person who never shows up.
Yeah, that is so cool. And just kind of getting back, because that's super interesting. So like the pseudo anonymous economy, like, do you think that that's enabled by people just having an address that sort of becomes your identity? Like, I know there's a lot of companies that are trying to create sort of a UI over the address. You could have like props, so like username, you could have like a login, and that's tethered to like MetaMask. And it's more like Ethereum ecosystem, but even with Hero, right, like you're able to now create this profile that's related to a wallet address. And now like this account can do something that's not just buying or selling or trading something, but now you have functionality in an application to do something. So do you sort of see it like that, where it's kind of amplifying like blockchain addresses? Like, is that sort of the identity that you're thinking of, or something even deeper than that?
So I feel like there's a two-part answer there. And the first one is the fact that this blockchains represent global payment systems. They represent the ability to move funds electronically near instantly or even quickly without that central authority that would commonly either block things from happening or delay the process, or at least introduce another layer of possible stuff that can go wrong. So we look at, like where Bitcoin and Ethereum, and then as Stacks rises and everything else, like where these things are, like what a cool ability. For you to just be anywhere in the world and you're like, hey, here's the address, and I'm like, boom, I sent it, and it's done. And there's no way to turn back, and that comes with its own problems, but it's the same when you hand somebody cash. Like if you went to the wrong place and you gave them cash and they took it, you'd be in the same position or if you mailed it to the wrong person, like it ain't coming back. Like that ain't gonna happen.
Totally.
So there's some similar things we have to learn, like on the technology side for that. But I do think that global payments definitely open up that ability, because then it doesn't matter, like I don't have to do this type of work from this type of place. And I could be in the middle of the city in a big tech area, or I could be talking to you out of a barn in a rural area, and it doesn't make any difference. And even if I never showed my face or anything about where I'm at, that is still possible just because the blockchains are decentralized, the nodes are around the world. Like it's just a fascinating concept. Like this is something that we as a society have not had access to until recent years, and we're still learning on what has been probably 12 years since the launch of Bitcoin.
Yeah, about that. Yeah,
that's barely anything. Like as far as like time, because I think of what happens in 50 years, 100 years, and and everything like that. So without getting too far off track, that's the one. So pseudonymous economy, I do think, is enabled by a global payment system that doesn't rely on intermediaries. I think that is beautiful. The other side of that was related to identity. And I think this is a fascinating topic. And part of what originally attracted me to Stacks was more related to their original Stacks 1.0 network. And what I mean by that is there were some things that were touted as the can't be evil versus the don't be evil attitude. And I absolutely love this. So one, you had the idea of a sovereign identity. So each address could be tied to like a name or something else through what they call the BNS or blockchain naming system. This is built into Stacks and operational today. So you'll see like a name I have is wobuddy.btc. And that one is mine. I can use that to actually send and receive money. And it could be built into other applications and used for other things. So I have an identity. And I wouldn't necessarily have to use my username that I like. I could use something else. I could use something random. Like that's what opens it up. But it's a consistent identity that I use across all applications. So similar to using MetaMask to log in with your address, we're seeing already at the core this was built into the Stacks network. And absolutely love how it works. And then taking that a step further, one of the things I didn't realize about crypto when I was introduced early on was the importance of your public-private key pair. And not so much in keeping it safe, which you should most definitely do and never share it with anyone and never take those DMs. But what it really means is that you have a public-private key pair. And there are so many things that are possible through having that, that are not really considered related directly to just the fact that I have a wallet and an address and this holds money. Like, well, I can do more than that. And that's where Blockstack or Stacks now has the Gaia system for storage. So imagine being able to set up an Amazon S3 hub or a DigitalOcean space or some other type of container that would host the data, but all of the data that's stored there is completely encrypted by the user's private key pair. And this was something I know you're familiar with because it was beautiful with Corona Tracker, because it was like, hey, let's build an app where we don't have access to the data.
Yeah,
the user eventually only has access to their own data. Means we still have to build functionality. We still have to imagine how they're going to use it. We're still having them interact with their data. But we entirely took that responsibility away, which as a small project trying to break into the healthcare sector was a really big deal.
Right.
To say like, hey, we don't handle data. But on top of that, like I think that ethos is what all application developers should be moving into as we get into Web3. It's like, do we really need shared data? And when you do, you can model it out. You can decide what's shared. You can like share that with the user. There's still the ability to do that. But by default, having that tight encryption and data protection, I thought was absolutely amazing as well. So, you've got identity, you've got data storage, you've got the blockchain naming system, and then you've got obviously the smart contracts with Clarity. It was more than enough to dive into, and the more I get into it, the more I just enjoy spending time here.
That's awesome. And it's just really cool because when we started, we were just talking about DevOps, and now we're talking about full-scale ideation to build in production and deploying apps really live to real users. So I would say, for anyone that's interested in DevOps, I think, and I saw Open Up the Cloud on Instagram. It's like an account that I follow a lot. The guy who creates it makes a lot of really great content. But he was talking about, like, do you need to know code to be a DevOps or a cloud engineer? And it was interesting because it's sort of, it depends what you want to do. And I still really sort of believe that of if you want to just be, deploying scripts or just working in Docker, you take the code and then you make sure that it's running, maintain, maybe need to update packages that a code needs to run, like in the package.json, maybe just updating things for security. But if you want to be building apps like this, where it's sort of way more than DevOps, but the sole purpose of it is you need to know how to deploy it for an end user. You need to know how to be a maintainer to be able to work with someone like me so that I can work on the project. You can sort of see how it now becomes, if you're passionate about something, you're going to then find new things to learn. So it's really easy to, I feel like, and Jason, you can let me know if you disagree, but I feel like it's easy to go down the rabbit hole if you just start with a certain path. I mean, even if you're just doing like front end, you then might need to know algorithms to know how the functions can work. So then now you're pushing back end. And this is like my experience, right? Like I started with a company just on front end side, and then it's slowly, and they use Angular for their stack, but it sort of became okay, we're doing like front end things, HTML, CSS, then enter in TypeScript. Now TypeScript needs to come in there. And then now we're sort of bringing in programming into the front end. And then also with deployment. So we have like our own deployment script or build, pushing that onto the on the hosting site. It's now becoming way more than just what we started. So it's easy to go down the rabbit hole, right? Like it's easy to just find different areas to go down. If you're passionate about it though, right? Like, would you say?
Yeah, totally. And I've always enjoyed like learning how the different parts work together. So as somebody like working strictly on the DevOps side, it's like, okay, I can make sure the servers run, make sure things are available as you need them. We can design a backend for a database for an application or do something like that and just make sure that everything works as you want. But getting the experience, at least a little bit in each area, kind of teaches you how things work full circle. And you can definitely head down a lot of rabbit holes on the way. One thing that came to mind while you were talking is a revelation that I sort of had about UI is, so while I will say you can get away with it without knowing code, it's not like you have to what we're doing in the UI with React is not related to DevOps. That's front end engineering. But knowing how those tie together is important. But the point I wanted to make was, in Linux, there's this concept that everything is a file. And it took me forever to realize that. It didn't make sense. I was like, what do you mean devices are files? Like, what do you mean my USB drive is a file? Like but eventually I started to understand the idea that like you interact with the different files different ways. That's what drivers are for, et cetera. And, it just gets more complex as you build on that base layer. But at the core of it, everything is a file. And the revelation that I had, or the relation there to what we were talking about, would really be that all UI is generally front end for a command line. So when you're using a tool that provides you a website, or when you're doing something similar, like you're usually trying to work with a set of core commands or features and put it in a more digestible way. So the more you can learn to work with just the console, especially when you're looking at server management of doing, like, let's say you have a bunch of Ubuntu servers and you're working with SSH and you only have console access, there's no GUI. There's a lot that can be done that becomes universal to different projects. So I definitely encourage jumping in and learning to be command line friendly. But like you were saying as well, there's a lot of different needs and levels that you'll kind of go through as people need things in different projects. So it's really about finding the right fit for what you're comfortable with. And as you're doing that and as you're learning, you can grow and expand and do more.
That's awesome. And one question that I did actually get, I also do just want to be respectful of your time, because this has been such a great conversation, and also sharing some of the sort of the pulling from your repo and then being able to push that into my local repo. I definitely look forward to, I do want to do kind of like a concentrated like dev session with you, like at a later point, and we could kind of map out some more of the roadmap that you have for CityCoins. But one question I did get on Instagram was like, how do you get started in DevOps? Like a lot of people that they are passionate about a project, but then they like don't exactly know where to start. I think obviously like we could say like they could probably start with CityCoins, and I'm sure you'd be like a great mentor for anyone that's interested in blockchain and building something that is going live to a lot of people, and it's like a sort of a national global project. But for someone that's sort of like, this is a lot, what do I do? Like, where do I start? How would you reduce overwhelm for someone that is like, I'm passionate about this, but I don't exactly know where to begin in my journey on DevOps, or maybe full stack software engineering? Because I mean, you're a full stack like dev, but for someone that maybe wants to be like there, but wants to maybe start with DevOps, like there's a lot. Like, where do you start? Where would you recommend starting?
Yeah. So mainly with DevOps, I think the best thing you can do is get comfortable with running a server or running a service, one or the other. And what came to mind for me there was, when you talked about somebody having a passion for something, find an open source project that is aligned with your passion and learn how to run it locally. And it will teach you a lot. And it may vary entirely from project to project. For example, if you're looking at what we have, you would be the contracts. You would be running Clarinet locally, and like kind of seeing how that works better or back and forth with what runs in the GitHub Actions. Yeah, and you would kind of see like how contract interactions happen on the blockchain, which is technically where we store our data. So in this case, it's a decentralized or a distributed computing system, which is pretty amazing. Another win for blockchains. And same with like the UI. You would say, "Oh, I'm really passionate about building and maintaining a website like this." Well, if you can learn how the package managers work, you build it locally, you can see it running locally, the same as if it were running somewhere else, and then you can find the next step, which in that case might be, okay, how do I host this on Cloudflare Workers? And you walk through their documentation, and you're like, boom, I've got it up on a domain on Cloudflare Workers, or Heroku, or one of the many, many options out there. I mean, I see stuff hosted just all over the place. And they generally all have different workflows and ways to make things work. So if you're starting from a place of passion, I think it would be really fun to find a project and to go through that process. And one nice feedback loop you can do for other developers and people like that is to share your experience. So, like let's say you came in here and you took the CityCoins contracts and you were trying to run Clarinet, and maybe you're having an issue on Windows or something like that. Well, you turn back and share that with the team, and they might go, oh, well, we'd love to update the instructions to better accommodate that case, or maybe you missed this little thing or that little thing. Like it starts to build a connection with the project, and that's a great way to contribute, is just to do, it's almost like user testing in a way. It's like, okay, I'm going to read through your documentation, I'm going to build everything, I'm going to get it done, I'm going to learn how it works, but I'm also going to give back along the way.
That's awesome. Oh, yeah, I love this. So just kind of walking through, start with a server or a service. So maybe just something that's like light and like, I don't want to say like easy, because if you've never done it before, you might be like server, service. But I do think just sort of a thread through all of these is like Google is your friend. And like even just being like, how do I run a server in the cloud, or how do I run a service serverlessly or something like that. A lot of times, like when I got into this obviously through like design and like UI UX front end, but something that like when you're learning Photoshop, a lot of times it's like, how do I create a box shadow for a shape? How do I add a gradient? How do I like make the photo black and white? And like I find myself still Googling stuff that I want to know, like how do I mask an SVG inside of a shape and then cut that out? Like if you start Googling kind of the answers to it, that's the easiest way to get started. And I think a lot of times what gets really hard is articulating to yourself what you want to do. But if you can explain like in words what you're trying to do, you can create questions that map out the gaps that you have in your knowledge. And then also, so the second point you had was start with open source. So maybe plug to CityCoins, but you might want to contribute to that as a project, right? Like, because that's what we're doing. And like Jason, you taught me actually quite a lot, which is always fun. But find an open source project. Like we started working on Corona Tracker, and that was obviously a COVID specific project, in kind of like a scary time. And like, and when I say sort of, it was a very scary time. But we were sort of united in a sense where we were working on something for the public good, a social impact project. So that's where when you're passionate about something, it kind of leads into like the next part, right? Where when you're passionate about it, like you'll start learning a ton of stuff. And like that whole experience actually taught me a lot about coding and code bases and deployment that I would never have been really exposed to unless I had been working at, like a big tech company, because we were building something from ideation to production. So it's cool when passion and starting can align. So if you can start on a project and your passion can kind of be interwoven, that's really special. And then I like to also sort of that fourth point you had, which is like sharing and connecting with the community and team, being able to communicate. There's also just in terms of like learning in public, it's like Siswig. I forget like his Twitter handle. It's like SWYG. I think that's like his Twitter handle. I always forget it because I think his name is Sean, but he always talks about learning in public. And I think that that's like something that is super underrated in terms of how you can think about learning. A lot of times you sort of have to feel like you're writing notes in a textbook and then it's sort of like until you feel comfortable to share it with the world, it's like you don't share anything. But oftentimes, like, and like you said, Jason, like when you're sharing this with the team, that might then actually help them understand their product better. And then that also might bring you more into it. So maybe if you're really passionate about something, the team might say like, oh, like, are you interested in like working on this? And that could lead to a job. Like maybe that could lead to a project. Maybe it's a nonprofit and like you could now work on a project that you're really passionate about that could help a lot of people. Maybe there's a company that's working on like maybe like a stealth mode type project, and because you're passionate about it and maybe you have some in-depth knowledge of something really specific or niche, they might bring you into that. So you never know unless you share and connect and communicate with others. So I liked how you talked about that, of just communicating what you're building, what you're learning. And again, you never know where those connections can lead.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. And this is something that when we were originally talking about doing this video series, and as we possibly continue to play some more with these ideas, I love the idea of learning in public, and it's something that I have to get used to personally. Like I'm the guy who, you would have the steps down to the basement where the lab is. Just send me to the lab, and like I'll eat ramen and simple foods, and I'll come back up with the. You have no idea what I tried to get here, but it is here and it's working the way I want it to. And I love that learning in public concept, because what's to say solving problems I did along the way, or even thinking things this that whole learning process is really fascinating to leave out there for people. A little of what you inspired me to do is to go live and to do this type of coding, and to really last week or to just kind of like switch back and forth and say like, okay, I'm working on this part, and this is what I'm doing, what I'm here, and I'm enjoying the process. Even bumbling, is absolutely beautiful. Okay, figure it out.
Yeah, 100%. And it was really cool to just see how, again, like how we could sort of, you could work on a project and I could work on a project and we could be working on it at the same time. That was just really fun to see, and then have it all come together where, I pushed something, you added like a ton of code and like updates and everything, and then I'm able to pull that and see that. But as a maintainer, you're able to sort of have that view of the DevOps side where it's not necessarily for production that's being live right now, but DevOps for another developer, so that like it's that developer type of operation where now I could be up and running, and now I see like, oh, okay, this is Jason's vision. How can I build on this? Like, how could I add in maybe more designs or more features or maybe some functions? So it's sort of helpful to communicate that back to people on the project, where then you have your vision, you articulate that, and now like I sort of see like, okay, like I see where you're going with this, and now I know what to add on to. So different types of DevOps, like there's DevOps for like production for like end clients, but then there's also DevOps internally for a team, especially open source, like contributors. So people that maybe, aren't officially like on the team, but people that can contribute to something because they're passionate about the project and its mission. So yeah, but thank you, Jason, so much for walking through all this. I've really enjoyed this series with you, and it's been fun to sort of see CityCoins be, developing over along. And I think maybe next time we can really do like a deep dive into like some development and do like maybe like pair programming, or like you back end, like the front end, we could do more of that. But I think for anyone that's tuning in, this is going to be really helpful to show people how just contributing to open source can work and what that actually looks like, so that if you actually want to start on a project, there's of course all these articles of like, I built this open source thing, but like, how do you get started on an open source project? Like, where are those articles? There's not a lot of them. So, or you have to really know where to look. So I'm hoping that this content series can be helpful for anyone that wants to find a project and get started building something or building with someone.
Yeah, definitely. And I appreciate you having me, and I'm happy to put together some more as we see fit, because I enjoy doing it, and I enjoy teaching people overall. So, if anybody did want to be involved with CityCoins and learn a little bit about blockchain, smart contracts, front-end UI based on, in this case, React and Bootstrap, but libraries interact with the Stacks blockchain that are usable across different interfaces and everything else. Like learning to use the command line around nodes, not only running them, but being able to know like the APIs to query. I love teaching. So this is what I really want to do, and that's the Stacks advocate side of me that's coming out is, I found this cool thing and I want to share it with everybody. And I think one of the best ways I can do that is to give back in this way. And I think it's kind of funny overall that, Stacks being an open source project and Corona Tracker happening at the time it did was actually the way we were able to meet and even be able to get to this point now. So, it has a genuine start, which I really appreciate.
Yeah, no, totally. And like, I think open source is really awesome because it really allows you to meet with people that are like-minded and people that you're really like, I'd say like interested in like working with and probably have similar goals, ambitions, and, sort of like when you volunteer, like just with any sort of organization, I think that you, again, like you find other people that are also volunteers and are passionate as well. And maybe are interested in innovation, fixing problems and helping people. Like we wanted to help keep people safe during the pandemic. So that's like, obviously like you sort of have like similar goals just on the off, like just from the start. But, even being able to see blockchain development, like that's another area where we sort of had collaborations and like interest in. So that's been super cool. And I do just, in terms of closing, I would love people to just know where they can find you or how they can contribute to CityCoins, and maybe just sort of like a general way that I know like you're on Twitter, but how could people get in touch with you and also contribute to CityCoins?
Yeah, I'd say the best place to start with is really the Discord server. So there's two. There's one for Stacks. You can find it through the main Stacks website. And there's also one for CityCoins. And we just put a vanity URL on it, actually. So it's discord.gg/CityCoins. And that'll take you to the server. There's areas to talk about the contract and UI and just ask some general development questions. Outside of that, there's a whole bunch of documentation. Myself, I am available as WoBuddy on all platforms. So I'm there in the Discord and same on GitHub, same username. And yeah, just happy to reach out however people are comfortable. If GitHub is something you're still getting used to or you're not quite sure what to do, then Discord is usually easier to start in. If you're already kind of up to speed and know what you're doing, then feel free to take a look at the open issues, jump in and make a pull request. We can definitely improve things together. Very, very open collaboration and helping people out.
That's awesome. All right. Well, this is super fun. I'm like really grateful just for your time and attention and like being able to walk through, with me and also the viewers of this channel, how open source works and how GitHub works and, how to contribute code to, CityCoins or really any open source project or any project on GitHub. So Jason, thank you so much for your time. I had a blast and looking forward to continuing the series. And maybe again, the next time we could do some more like deep dive, in-depth coding and maybe do like more front end, we do more, back end, and we can also share that live. That'll be super fun. So again, thank you again, Jason, so much. And everyone that's tuning in, hope you enjoy this live stream.
Awesome, man. Yeah, definitely. Thank you again. Thank you everyone who's watching, and hopefully look forward to seeing some new faces in the community.
Awesome. All right. Thanks, everyone.
Fingers crossed.
Fingers crossed.
Thank you.
We'll talk soon. All right. See you, Jason.